In the last 2 hours, hundreds gathered to celebrate Stephen Hawking. In the last 4 hours, Stephen Hawking laid to rest. Photos. In the last 6 hours, actor Ed Redmayne leads the tributes at Stephen Hawking funeral. Letter: we should accept result of EU referendum. Professor Stephen Hawking funeral. Legacy will live forever. Great scientist Stephen Hawking's funeral takes place in Cambridge. In the last 8 hours, hundreds gathered for Stephen Hawking's funeral in Cambridge. Earlier today, Stephen Hawking funeral in UK honouring a legacy will live forever. Cambridge pays last tribute to genius of Hawking. Celebrities gather for Stephen Hawking funeral at Cambridge. Stars pay their respects at Stephen Hawking's funeral yesterday. Ed Redmayne speaks at Stephen Hawking's funeral. Stephen Hawking's funeral held. Ed Redmayne gives reading. Friends and family attend funeral of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking honoured during funeral in England. Thousands gather in Cambridge for Stephen Hawking's funeral. Video: hundreds gather outside Hawking's funeral. Hundreds gather outside Hawking's funeral. Scientist, pop culture icon Stephen Hawking mourned at Cambridge funeral. Hundreds flock to farewell Stephen Hawking. Family, friends and stars turn out for Stephen Hawking's funeral. Ed Redmayne pays tribute to Stephen Hawking at his funeral. Cambridge farewell for Hawking. Ed Redmayne, Elon Musk, and more attend Stephen Hawking's funeral. Recommended reading: Saving Stephen Hawking's Voice. Ed Redmayne joins Stephen Hawking's friends and family at funeral. Ed Redmayne gives reading at funeral of Professor Stephen Hawking. Hundreds line Cambridge streets to honour Stephen Hawking. Ed Redmayne gave a reading at Stephen Hawking's funeral. Hundreds line streets to say goodbye to Stephen Hawking. Hundreds gather to bid farewell to Stephen Hawking funeral of renowned physicist Stephen Hawking. Listen to the ethereal space-inspired music from Stephen Hawking's funeral. Stars turn out for Stephen Hawking's funeral. Hawking was an amazing person. Huge turnout as Stephen Hawking farewelled Professor Stephen Hawking. Laid to rest. Stephen Hawking's funeral held in Cambridge. Video: Stephen Hawking's funeral held in Cambridge. Stephen Hawking funeral. Ed Redmayne leads tributes to physicist. Hundreds line streets to honour Stephen Hawking. Redmayne leads tributes at Stephen Hawking's funeral. Mourners flock to funeral of physicist Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking honoured by hundreds at UK funeral. Ed Redmayne among hundreds to pay respects to Professor Stephen Hawking. Ed Redmayne pays tribute to Stephen Hawking at scientist's funeral. Video: hundreds attend funeral of Professor Stephen Hawking. Video: Insight, Stephen Hawking's Cambridge funeral. Hundreds line Cambridge streets to honour Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking gets space-themed send-off at funeral. Hundreds line Cambridge streets to honour Hawking. Watch. Mourners pay tribute to Professor Stephen Hawking at funeral. Friends, public flock to Hawking funeral. Friends, family gather for Stephen Hawking's funeral in Cambridge. Stephen Hawking laid to rest, honoured by friends and colleagues in pictures. Stars come out to remember Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking laid to rest, honoured by friends and colleagues. Huge crowds line Cambridge's King's Parade for Stephen Hawking's funeral. Celebrities mourn Hawking's death at funeral. Video: Stephen Hawking's coffin arrives at Great St. Mary's Church. Video: Queen guitarist Brian May seen arriving at Hawking's funeral. Crowds gather to say goodbye to Stephen Hawking. Family, friends and public gather for funeral of physicist Stephen Hawking. Friends, family, public flock to funeral of physicist Stephen Hawking.